break through strong enemy lines, and the vehicle was also designed to work with the T-35 heavy tank, which also had many parts in common. The T-28 tank was in many respects similar in design to the British Vickers A1E1 Independence. Although there was only one prototype of the tank, built in 1926, it heavily influenced the design of tanks during the two wars. In 1930, Ginsburg led a Soviet purchasing delegation to Britain in an attempt to purchase the most innovative armored vehicle technology from Britain and also acquired a patent for production in the Soviet Union. One of the models preferred by the Soviet purchasing delegation was the Independence, and the other was the Vickers 6-ton tank. Due to secrecy, Vickers rejected the Soviet consortium's intention to purchase the Independence tank, but proposed a compromise. For a lump sum payment of £20,000, equivalent to 200,000 rubles in 1930, Britain will sell its knowledge of design and development. An order was placed from Vickers for 10 unarmed Independence tanks for £16,000 sterling, 160,000 rubles. No Independence, only Carden-Lloyd ultralight vehicles and Vickers 6-ton vehicles will be purchased. Due to the high price, the Soviet delegation abandoned the plan to purchase the Independence from the United Kingdom, and only developed a multi-turret combat vehicle similar to hers based on the experience of the Independence. The draft of the new combat vehicle was contested by the Mechanization Academy under the Military Technical Academy, now Peter the Great Strategic Rocket Military Academy, with the VOAO Design Bureau, a combat vehicle development unit founded by Ginsburg on January 28, 1931. In July 1931, the drafts of the two units were prepared, and finally the Soviet upper echelons decided to develop them by the VOAO Design Bureau. The technical draft for Ginsburg largely follows the specifications and firepower of the Independence, with a total weight of 16 metric tons, a 45 mm gun in the main turret, 2 machine guns in the front, and 20 mm in front of the hull armor, 16 to 17 mm on the sides, 10 mm at the top, and 8 mm at the bottom. The power was transplanted from the Mikulin M5 engine, which was originally used on the aircraft, and this scheme was already used on the BT-2 tank. On September 28, 1931, the Soviet government reached an agreement with the VOAO Design Bureau to complete the drawing in two prototype T-28s by May 1, 1932. The first prototype, the T-28-1, left the factory in May 1932 and was tested on May 29. The T-28-1 differed from the original design in that it was powered by a higher output M17 engine, and the main gun was replaced by a 37mm PS2 tank gun already in service due to the lack of development of a 45mm gun. On June 11, 1932, the Soviet military demanded that the second prototype be replaced with the developing PGE diesel engine and the PS3 76mm gun, which would be compared with the T-28-1. In October 1932, the Labor and Defense Committee of the USSR ordered the start of mass production of the T-28 tank with a 76mm gun, and the No. 2 prototype had not yet left the factory. In order to mass-produce the T-28, the Soviet government decided to do all the work at the Kirov plant in Leningrad, because the T-28 was the result of extremely complex mechanical technology at the time, and only the Kirov plant had enough and experienced production workers to handle the manufacturing business. In November 1932, the design drawings arrived at the factory, which began production of the T-28. However, as soon as the design was shipped to the factory, problems began to grow. The MX2 plant, dedicated to the production of the T-28, was not suitable for the production of parts that required high precision, such as fuel tanks, due to excessive wear and tear on manufacturing equipment. In order to solve the problem of machine tools, some machine tools purchased during the First World War were restored and put into use. The Kirov plant was also unable to produce some of the parts, and was eventually subcontracted to other factories in Leningrad. The first batch of T-28s, numbering 12 units, left the factory in April 1933. And in May took part in the military parade on Red Square. However, in reality, these vehicles are still not able to fight, including the lack of internal and external radios, and the lack of artillery optical sights. Therefore, after the parade, all of them returned to the factory to continue to work. The T-28 tank was approved for use on August 11, 1933, but in fact, the T-28 was still a bunch of problems to be solved from production to equipment. It was originally planned that 90 T-28s should be completed in 1933, but only 41 were produced. In order to cure the problem of mass production, the Soviet Union once again purchased new manufacturing lathes from abroad to upgrade the MX-2 plant. In the autumn of 1933, the Kirov plant separated the T-28 production line into a separate tank design bureau, SKB-2, the main task of which was to make the T-28 mass-produced to meet the standards set by the upper echelons. The mass production and contracting of the T-28 was largely settled in 1934, but the design was not fully finalized until 1936, and more than 700 design corrections were implemented before it was finalized. The T-28 produced in 1933 to 1935 also had various problems, which brought a considerable logistical load to the grassroots troops. In 1936, the Soviet Union organized 4 heavy tank brigades using T-28s, the 1st, 4th, 5th, and 6th, which were deployed in the Belarusian military district, the Kiev military district, the Kharkov and Stalingrad military districts, but the command was vested in the Supreme High Command. After their reorganization in 1939, they were renamed the 21st, 10th, 14th, and 20th Heavy Tank Brigades. Between 1933 and 1941, a total of 503 T-28 tanks were produced, and after the production problem was cured in 1935, the production of the T-28 was more or less in line with the upper indicators, and only in 1937 was the production of the T-28 due to the development support of the T-29 tank. Although the design of this type of vehicle was not very successful in combat, it was an important milestone for Soviet designers, including a series of tests on the T-28 tank, which had a certain influence on the future development of the tank. After 1933, the T-28 was a frequent visitor to military parades on Red Square, Leningrad, Kiev. However, it was not until 1939 that the T-28 was officially put into the battlefield, and the reason was that it was still dragged down by mechanical failures, and the grassroots evaluation was not high. On December 12, 1935, the People's National Defense Committee ordered the tank regiment to be restructured into a heavy tank brigade, which was organized into 3 tank battalions, 1 training camp, 1 combat support battalion and several other units, and the brigade was equipped with 54 T-28s, 16 BT tanks, 18 T-26s, 3 Spitfire tanks and related support vehicles, and the heavy tank brigade had an establishment of 1,400 people. On May 21, 1936, the People's Commissariat of National Defense ordered the reorganization of the Heavy Tank Brigade under the command of the Military District, and the main task of the Heavy Tank Brigade was established as strengthening the configuration for the infantry when breaking through the defensive positions. In September 1939, the 10th Heavy Tank Brigade, 98 vehicles, and the 21st Heavy Tank Brigade, 105 vehicles, were engaged in the invasion of Poland, and although there was no actual exchange of fire during the march, the mechanical reliability of the T-28 gave the troops some confidence in it during the long march of 350 to 400 kilometers. The Winter War against Finland was the first time that the T-28 was brought to war, and was deployed by the Soviet Army's 20th Heavy Tank Brigade, which was the only one to be equipped with the T-28 in the 1939-1940 war. The 21st Brigade is equipped with 105 T-28s, 5 BT-5s, 21 BT-7s, 11 BHM-3 Spitfires, more than 20 armored vehicles and additional support trucks, and the total strength of the brigade is 2,936 men. The main task of the T-28 was to break through the Mannerheim line of the Finnish army, and due to its towering body, the T-28 could move steadily on snow up to 80 to 90 centimeters thick, and its huge hull could also effectively cross the anti-tank trenches dug by the Finnish army and destroy Finnish pillboxes. Between November 30, 1939 and March 13, 1941, the losses of the 21st Brigade were 564 killed and wounded, 169 killed. 482 combat vehicles were lost, 155 were destroyed by artillery, 77 were damaged by mines, 30 were burned, 21 were drowned in lakes or swamps, 2 were captured by the Finnish army, and 197 were lost due to mechanical failure. Due to the proximity of the battlefield to the Kirov factory and the abundant supply of logistical materials, the 21st Brigade suffered heavy losses, but generally did not lose its combat effectiveness. The loss of these 482 vehicles is all T-28 records, and 386 of them are reparable and returned to combat after repair. In addition to the 105 T-28s that were incorporated at the beginning, the 21st Brigade was replenished with 67 tanks during the war, so most of all the tanks were destroyed 2 to 3 times, recovered, repaired, and rebattled, and some of them were repaired as many as 5 times. In post-war statistics, only 32 T-28s were actually lost to the point of irreparability, 30 were burned and 2 were captured, and these 30 were later repaired 11 vehicles, and the actual loss of the 21 Brigade in the entire tank was only 19 vehicles. The Finnish army captured 2 T-28s in the Winter War, and then another 5 in the continuation of the war, for a total of 7. The Soviet Union had about 411 T-28 tanks at the time of the German invasion in June 1941, which was outdated by the standards of 1941, and after 1940, the Soviet armored forces began to be restructured. Most of the T-28 tanks were lost in the first 2 months after the invasion, and most of them were abandoned due to mechanical problems. Some T-28 tanks took part in the defense of Leningrad and Moscow in the winter of 1941, but after the late 1941 period, the number of T-28s in service with the Red Army was extremely scarce, and a small number were captured and used by enemy forces. Today there are still 3 T-28 tanks, 2 in Finland and 1 in Moscow. The T-28 kept by Finland is in the Parola Tank Museum, and the tank is also painted in the field livery of the Finnish Army. Despite the fact that the T-28 was considered a useless weapon in 1941 and that it was preceded by a number of heavy tanks, such as the French Char 2C, it still had its value. For several years after its launch, there was no medium tank in the world that could compare with the T-28. The T-28 had modern equipment that was considered advanced at the time, such as all T-28s had radios. After the outbreak of World War II, due to the upgraded armor, it was no less protective than the early model of the Panzer IV, although its suspension and design were outdated. The T-28 had obvious drawbacks. The piston spring suspension system was inferior, but other excellent suspension devices used on World War II tanks had not been developed at the time of the T-28's appearance. The tank also had flaws in the engine and transmission, and the worst thing was the lack of elasticity in the design. Although the T-28 had comparable armor and firepower to the early models of the Panzer IV, the Panzer IV was built with a good base design, while the T-28 was an improvement on a poor base design. Unfortunately for the Red Army, the T-28 showed its problems in the battles of 1939. The towed anti-tank gun, developed in the 1930s based on high-speed suspensions, not only improved the anti-tank capability, but also improved the firepower of the tank itself. But the actual combat experience of the Spanish Civil War proved that small infantry units could destroy modern tanks with towed anti-tank guns, so that tanks in various countries around the world were extremely vulnerable under low armor. Despite the heavy losses, in the Winter War, the 28th Tank Brigade of the Red Army, armed with T-28, fulfilled its mission, to break through the Mannerheim Line. As an infantry support tank designed to cover infantry to break through enemy strongholds, the T-28 was a successful design in the early 1930s.